desperately looking for the center. They don't want Batista. They don't want Fidel Castro. Someone in the middle. But there is no one in the middle in '58. Okay, they're all gone. They've been pushed to one side or the other, and many of them increasingly in Fidel's camp. Okay, so they try to find that after '61. They try to find the general center as these are the people we want to support. These are the people that the Alliance for Progress dollars are going to help support. And that way, say, the Venezuelans that were throwing rocks and spitting on Richard Nixon back in '58, they're going to say, well, you know what, actually the Americans aren't so bad, they're doing this, they're doing that, and so we would rather much prefer that Venezuela be pro-Kennedy than pro-Castro. Okay, they're looking for that middle ground. The problem, though, in a broad sense, is that if the elites, okay, the really, really most powerful people in the country, aren't going to support him, what do you do? Okay, and that's a real hard problem for the Kennedy administration to answer, or later the Johnson administration. Ultimately, and in a very, very broad sense, because Latin America is a number of countries that are all diverse and have their own particular politics and histories. But in a general sense, if you're worried about these kind of center-left reformers, and if they do too much reform, then you're, oh no, they're like Castro. He's pushing land reform too much. They're not the safe bet. You either worry that they become weak, and they'll get deposed, and the leftists will come to power, or maybe they're actually leftists in disguise, and we can't trust them if they start doing too much in terms of reform. Okay, and so the safe bet for the United States came to be those conservative elites. That doesn't mean that they necessarily liked that all the time, but that's often, I think, what happened in terms of whom the United States directed its support to.
If they had taken things worse, who did you think was going to take over?
Probably some coalition led by those very Cuban exiles. And that was the problem, was that these were the people that had been identified by Cubans on the mainland as the kind of guys that they didn't want. Because the exiles, some of them might have left in '59, some of them might have left before that in '58. These were conservatives, kind of like, in many respects, I think the Somozas in Nicaragua, identified as that kind of elite that was opposed to change of any kind. So they're the ones coming back in the counter-revolution. And that particular time, I don't think that counter-revolution would have had that, the public support to do that. Other questions before we go on to Brazil, just as an example?
Why, despite the fact that whether you have a Republican president or a Democratic president, trade with China, which everybody knows is very oppressive down in this country, but we won't trade with Cuba, which is not a military threat to the United States, and it hasn't changed. There's a hypocrisy there, but I don't understand why you trade with China and say, well, it's okay because there are different types of communists than Cuba.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, and the logic behind that, say, policy, is that if you're taking that free trade economic liberal approach to China, the argument is that, yeah, they've got an oppressive government, but if we can kind of get the door open and turn the Chinese into Western consumers that will get some economic power out of capitalism, be somewhat westernized, then at some point they're going to want political power to match their economic status in society. And that's how you bring down communism in China. And you're exactly right, that same argument apparently through our past history has not applied to Cuba. And I think the two main reasons for that is, number one, as the exile community in Cuba has grown throughout the 60s and 70s, there's a powerful constituency in American politics that doesn't like Castro and doesn't want anything to change there. So I think well, originally the South Florida Cuban lobby has a lot to do with that. The second, though, is you could flip the argument around and say, well, no, maybe we should try to economically isolate China as we're doing to Cuba presently, with travel restrictions, trade embargo, and early in the 60s attempt to invade or knock off Castro. And there you get into power relations. Traditionally, the United States has been able to apply its influence in Latin